Iris berapa penuh Bapak tinggal sama Tuhan?
Pagi Pak Karel.
Pagi-pagi, gimana Pak?
Udah pada banyak ya? Belum?
Belum, masih 21. Kita tunggu. Belum jamnya, kan jam 10.
Kalau ngomong yang lain-lain boleh dikit ya?
Boleh.
Mungkin saya salah, tapi orang Bali kuno dulu tuh bilang ada wiye paki gitu. Mungkin bener apa nggak? Pernah dengar nggak?
Belum sih Prof, bisa dijelasin Prof.
Nah, itu artinya ada di mana-mana. Nah, era online ini sekarang saya tambahkan menjadi tidak kemana-mana, tapi ada di mana-mana.
Iya.
Artinya pada jam ini saya nongol di webinar ini, pada beberapa saat lagi nongol di bimbingan mahasiswa, mungkin saat lagi ada lagi di magang begitu loh. Artinya dia nggak kemana-mana tapi ada di mana-mana. Wah, ini hebat banget. Ya, kalau dulu orang nggak pakai teknologi, konon kabarnya gitu. Jadi zaman pewayangan dulu atau zaman orang sakti dulu katanya bisa kelihatan kemana-mana gitu. Nah, sekarang teknologi membantu kita ada di mana-mana. Seperti Pak Karel, ntar kalau ada yang dari Inggris ke Inggris wajahnya itu kelihatan.
Ais. Pak Prof Rumawan nih.
Iya. Saya jadi tadi, saya terinspirasi, ini dulu orang bilang, sering kan orang bilang itu, kalau dulu kita jam 9 ada di sini, kayak Pak Kastawan lah kemarin cerita tuh di WA apa di Facebook. Jam sekian saya di Kedonganan, jam sekian ada di rumah jabatan, jam sekian ada di sini, itu kemana-mana kelihatan dalam sehari.
Ya, via online semuanya.
Ya, cuman dia beda-beda di jam ininya. Tapi kalau kita bisa dalam jam yang sama, bisa
di beberapa tempat ya, bagus. Ya mungkin memang harus terbiasa dengan kebiasaan baru ini, Prof. Ya,
iya.
Sepertinya akan agak lama dikit ya, Prof, ya ini ya, COVID ya. Kan belum clear kan, malah varian baru muncul kan?
Varian baru muncul lagi. Bahkan varian barunya tanpa gejala lagi.
Nah, ini yang di Bali padahal ada wacana mau buka, gimana Prof pendapatnya kalau tentang itu?
Mungkin karena saya berpikir spirit mereka itu uang yang dilihat gitu ya. Artinya ekonomi yang dipandang perlu dikedepankan. Jadi seperti itu, mereka kepingin dibuka, lalu ada dengan pengetatan misalkan. Lah aku sak mikir iki yang mengetatkan sopo, soalnya kan kayak di Gilimano aja surat aja bisa dikopi diperbanyak.
Ya tinggal bayar aja beres juga.
Ya itulah makanya orang-orang lapangan saya tanya, gimana kalau kamu mau pulang dagang sayur misalkan, oh gampang Pak, tinggal kasih uang. Yang benar saya bilang iya katanya. Lah kalau sudah begitu gimana, apalagi dengan gule dolarnya mungkin lebih mahal dari rupiah kita kan.
Ya bisa jadi itu memang. Ya karena market terbagus di sini sih.
Ya itulah, tapi saya juga nggak ngerti kalau saya tinjauan lapangan 3 minggu yang lalu, kebetulan itu dari Pantai Pererenan sampai ke Batu Beleg situ.
Rame, masih bule-bule.
Iya, masih rame.
Iya, bule-bule yang nomad itu.
Yang rame itu mereka karena nggak bisa pulang atau memang baru
Mereka
pendatang deh juga nggak.
Bule nomad, Prof. Jadi ya kemungkinan visa ilegal tapi kerja di sini, banyak kan gitu.
Nah, dan yang lebih hebat lagi, minggu lalu aku pulang kampung, tidak terbayang oleh saya di pinggiran kota Bangli itu ada orang yang sudah buka tempat makan lengkap dengan penginapan. Dan ketika saya tanya, ada orangnya nggak yang tidur di sini? Ada. Saya ketemu orang Perancis. Orang Perancis, satu sudah agak umur, yang satu agak muda. Jadi salah satunya arsitek. Senang saya, bahkan saya bilang karena yang arsitek ini yang lebih tua nggak bisa bahasa Inggris, yang lebih muda bisa.
Ya, ya.
Ya saya kepingin mengajak dia karena dia lebih bicara soal geometric architecture. Jadi ingin invite sebagai guest lecture gitu. Tapi apa dia berkenan apa enggak kan karena Perancis bahasanya.
Ya.
Itu mungkin harus Pak Samsul atau Bu Wid mungkin yang jadi.
Iya, in France sama Pak Sam.
Iya. Ya itu artinya kenapa dia di sini sudah berapa lama? Oh, sudah lama sekali Pak, sejak COVID berlangsung itu enggak pulang-pulang dia katanya. Loh, enggak dikasih pulang, mereka bisa hidup saya pikir gitu.
Bisa, Prof.
Enak sekali dia, saya lihat. Santai hidupnya.
Lah, Prof Rumawan kan juga 11-12, Prof.
Oh, aduh. Astungkar terlalu tinggi.
Iyalah.
Ya.
Orang kalau mahasiswa cerita, aduh paling keren rumahnya Pak Prof. Saya aja belum pernah boleh masuk ke sana, kok malah mahasiswinya boleh.
Mungkin mahasiswa yang punya cita rasa resort mungkin ya. Tapi kalau yang tidak senang kebun, yang senangnya mungkin lain pandangan. Wah, kita aja berdua nih kayak main pingpong, nggak ada yang dengerin. Katanya Bugam udah ada.
Sudah. Disapa aja Pak Prof.
Ya, coba. Good morning, Bugam. Bugam.
Masih sibuk.
You stay in Australia ya, Pak Karil? Still?
Likely, ya. Likely.
Still in Australia?
I guess so.
Oh, sih. Berarti juga nggak dapat izin pulang ke Bali ya?
Oh, dari sana ketat Pak, setahu saya ada teman. Dari sananya yang warningnya ke sini. Bukan Bali kan buka-buka aja. Negara yang bagus tuh dia yang melarang warganya untuk keliaran.
Bener. Aku dulu pengalaman Mas.
Sudah itu keren.
Pertama kali ke Australia itu disemprot Mas dari pesawat turun itu. Waktu itu ada flu apa di Afrika. Jadi agak tersinggung juga kita rasanya, tapi karena dia memberi announce gitu bahwa karena untuk ini masuk di negara kita harus semprot. Jadi di pesawat kita disemprot dulu seluruh badan kita untuk turun.
Apa sih? Itu kan memang sudah jadi haknya mereka.
Iya, hebat sekali dia. Bahkan bawa terasi aja dibongkar, nggak boleh dimasukin.
Iya, terasi durian.
Gawat lu. Kita ini malah sedang begini kok malah mau buka. Iya, Mas.
Tapi memang kalau nggak dibuka, kasihan juga kalau lihat sektor pariwisatanya terpuruk loh, Prof.
Oh iya, Mas. Kalau waktu saya rapat di ITDC, Nusa Dua, one of the famous and biggest hotel in Nusa Dua itu mengucapkan ke saya itu Anda 7% okupansinya. Artinya jauh di bawah titik imbang untuk bisa operate the big hotel itu gitu loh. Lalu
itu saya kira snowball efeknya itu yang ditakutkan pemerintah Bali kan. Kalau bisnis kan mungkin di atas 60% pendapatan di Bali kan dari PAD, sektor pariwisata. Nah, sektor pariwisatanya nggak nyumbang pajak gimana? Nanti kinerja pemerintahan nggak dapat uang dari situ kan, jadi snowball efeknya lumayan. Gimana Prof pendapatnya tuh?
Iya betul. Dan ini sudah berdampak di pertanian, Mas Karel. Waktu saya pulang ke Bangli, saya diskusi sama orang yang tadi saya bilang ada punya penginapan itu, dia juga beli gabah gitu, bahwa harga gabah turun. Yang mestinya orang susah cari beras sekarang menjadi turun karena terlalu banyak pekerja-pekerja yang kembali dari kota ke kampung, bekerja di pertanian, menghasilkan yang berlebihan. Sehingga harga beras turun.
Serapan pasarnya sedikit.
Iya, dan itu dia punya stok masih di gudangnya 20 ton gabah belum diproses karena tidak ada beli, daya turun, daya belinya juga ini karena persaingan juga, Mas.
Ya.
Saya berpikir, waduh kalau begini terus ini berat daya beli masyarakat, berat jadinya. Kalau lagi 6 bulan begini krisisnya mungkin berat tambah apa namanya akan membuat masalah. Iya, pagi Bu Siwo.
Ini sudah akan dimulai karena
ya,
sudah
please.
10.
Ya.
Mungkin kita siap-siap walaupun sudah baru 34 yang bergabung. Kita akan mulai jam 10. Sebelum itu saya akan menyapa dulu Bapak Ibu. Good morning everybody. Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu.
Good morning to.
Today we will discuss about Arsitektur Nusantara, and this activities actually we are doing it monthly, and the 6th of this discussion will host by Udayana University. So today we will discuss about order in architecture, and we have 2 speakers from Udayana University, and the other is from Newcastle University. For Ibu Gam, thank you for Prof. Alexander to join this discussion. And as we know, Indonesia has a lot of variety of Nusantara architecture, local architecture, and this one is very interesting. And in every architecture, they have their own order. So today we will discuss about order, and we hope that today discussion we can share our experience, we can share our knowledge, we can discuss something interesting. So I hope today we have a good time to discuss about order, and I hope all of you are enjoying this webinar. This webinar will be conducted by Mr. Karel. And as behalf of the program of architecture, I will say thank you for all of you. Thank you for the speakers, and thank you for Karel as the moderator. As a closing word, today I will give this time for Pak Karel. Pak Karel, time is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Siwalatri. Before we start this morning webinar, let me explain you about the timetable. So we have like 3 main sessions in this webinar. First is presentation from 2 speakers, continue by discussion, and will be end with conclusion and discussion from Professor Joseph Priyotomo. Before we start our first presentation, let me introduce you two main and quite famous speakers for today. The first speaker, his name is Alexander R. Cuthbert. He is Emeritus Professor, Planning and Urban Development at University of New South Wales in Sydney. He has lived, taught, and practiced in Scotland, Greece, America, Hong Kong, Australia, and Indonesia. He has over 100 publications and several books with a national award in Australia. What I remember from him is his book entitled Understanding Cities, Method in Urban Design. It is very famous and become a handbook in planning and urban school. And he ever showed me that he has translated in several languages, including Chinese and Russian, isn't it? It's quite fascinating. And what impressed me most about him is, besides his expertise in planning and urban design, he is quite friendly and modest man with very good hand sketches and very rare and distinctive urban professor who can do martial art and draw a perfect circle in one stroke. Okay, Alexander Cuthbert, how are you this morning? He is still mute. Can somebody unmute him?
We will do it. Unmute.
Okay. Thanks. Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's sharp and clear, sir.
Yeah, thanks. I just said thank you, Carol. You say too many nice things about me. I try to be modest. Sometimes it doesn't work.
It's fine.
Yeah, I've had a hard time recently.
Yeah, fine. But you're all right right now, I see. Okay. Before you start your presentation, let me introduce the second speaker first. The second speaker for today, her name is Gusti Ayu Madeswartika. She is a senior lecturer at Department of Architecture, Planning and Development at Udayana University, Bali, Indonesia. Her research focused on planning and development for developing nations. Her doctoral studies were carried out at University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. She has published 3 books dealing with development and vernacular architecture. Gusti Ayu Madeswartika, are you with me? How are you this morning?
Yes, Mas Karel, thanks so much.
Okay, I can hear you. But maybe for later, you might be louder a little bit. Okay.
Sorry, sorry, I was still muted. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
I can't hear you, but it's fine. Okay, without further ado, I can give time to Professor Alexander Cuthbert. Time is yours. Start your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Just say I don't use this very often, so I might need some backup at some point, but let's see what happens, okay?
Yeah, yes. We can help you, don't worry.
Now I've just hit share screen and nothing came up.
Share screen.
Host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay.
Mas Karel?
Ya, gimana Bu?
Rasanya host masih disable participant to.
Oh, hostnya bukan di saya masalahnya. Untuk Bu Linda Octavia sebagai host.
So, hostnya siapa?
Linda Octavia.
Sehingga,
Bu, ya. Sama lab SKTD, bukan di saya soalnya. Ya.
Oke, saya telepon. Oke.
Yeah, we can figure out, sir. Just wait a second. For Linda Octavia.
Again?
I will call her.
Yeah. Please manage give an access for Mr. Cuthbert can.
There we go.
Yeah.
Halo. Bisa diakses screen.
Here we go.
Yeah. It's on
Okay.
now. Okay. Time is yours.
We okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd just like to thank everybody in the committee that organizes this series of seminars. I think it's a fantastic idea. And I'm very happy to take part. I'm very pleased to take part. And if I had taken Siwa's instructions about order in architecture, I think it would have taken me another 10 years. So to simplify it is actually quite difficult. But the way I usually think, of course, is whenever I'm asked to do order in architecture, I would immediately think the opposite, that disorder in architecture is important. I mean, where does order come from? It comes from basically disorder, including the whole entire universe. We're looking in architecture at systems of disorder, not system, but situations of disorder that need structure and form. And so I think that we should concentrate as much on disorder and try and understand that, because in trying to understand order, we're looking at something that's already complete. It's finished. And what I hope to do is to illustrate that disorder and understanding it should actually be a fundamental part of a student's education. Now, how do I move this forward? And next slide. So the questions are, what do we mean by order? Everybody's concept is different. Are the uses of disorder not equally important? Is order in architecture historically conditioned? History is very important to me. I think everything begins and ends in history. And I think that it's context of history and its productions are very, very, I think today, not stressed sufficiently. Are architecture and building different? What is the relationship between the vernacular, the classical, and the modern, and which theory best explains order in architecture? That's the $50,000 question, as they say. Order origins in classical Greece. You forgive me for running through some basic Western conceptual systems that have created and introduced the whole concept of order into Western architecture. And of course, it all began in Greece, 500 BC. And we can see the Parthenon, probably, arguably, one of the most famous buildings in the world, if not the most famous. And on the bottom left of the screen here, there is a copy illustrating that the whole concept of classical architecture is still alive and well. This is in Louisiana, and they rebuilt the whole entire Parthenon, as well as the statue of Athene that it used to contain. The interesting thing about Greece is that we don't actually have any ancient texts from Greece talking about architecture. And in a sense, it was left up to Vitruvius. I have a copy of this, this Vitruvius 10 books on architecture, where he goes through all of what the situations that he thinks that were important to consider, typologies, geometry, structure, and things like that. And his 10 books on architecture really kind of set the foundation for the whole of Western thinking about architectural structures and theory. You can see the Vitruvian adoption of the classical Greek. This is 500 years after classical Greece, around about 100 AD. And you can see the detail that they went into. And each column had a specific function, had a specific size. The details were incredible. And this continuity of these, even this small detail, has been used today, right up to the present time. And we can see in fact, the one on the right, the top right there, is Minoan. And that preceded classical Greece by about 500 years. So you're looking at 3,000-year-old columns. But in addition to that, the interesting thing was that the classical Greek details have been used many times in postmodernism as a device of connecting to the past, but also changing it. And Charles Moore, who designed the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans, used the classical columns, and you can see on the bottom there that he made one out of stainless steel. The Ionic one is in stainless steel, and the left there's a Doric column, his adaptation of the Doric column. And then they used, even within modern architecture in the Deco period, you can see Adolf Loos, the famous Viennese architect, and you can see what he did with the classical column. He completely changed it, but it's still a classical detail. And it took a very long time after that before there was any sort of, in a sense, explosion in architecture that set the tone for the next 1,000 years nearly, right up to particularly Le Corbusier. Leonardo of Pisa, Fibonacci, the mathematician, who created what is called the Fibonacci series, or discovered the Fibonacci series. That was, at that time, considered the foundation of life. And you can see in nature that these are all, the natural plants are all based on the Fibonacci series. And the Fibonacci series was used as a system of a proportional system, in a sense, derived from nature, and was then moved forward and used right through from classical architecture into neoclassical architecture around about the 15th century in the Italian Renaissance. So the classicism was really the search for perfection in a given era, first and foremost in ancient Greece. But classicism should not be interpreted as purely a series of outdated forms. It's a series of principles that have been valid over the course of architecture of the last 2,500 years. And particularly more recently in neoclassicism, which is a nostalgia for the past and adoption of the details and style. In other words, classicism was the period within which all of the creations of classical architecture were used and lived. In other words, people were living in classical buildings, whereas in neoclassicism, this is borrowed. It was borrowed basically from the Greeks. But to some extent, that doesn't really matter very much. And here we have 10 books of architecture by Alberti, who was the next person, everybody, they all seem to want to write 10 books on architecture, except Sebastiano Serlio, that we'll come to next. But basically, Alberti wrote 10 books on architecture, and of course, they're all based on classical style. I mean, you can see the detail here in the cover of his book. This is straight from ancient Greece, so 1,500 years. They're still using the detailing of classical architecture, and particularly with Serlio. Although in a sense, Serlio, he broke away from that tradition because he focused on architecture not as individual buildings so much, but as a stage. He looked on architecture as creating a stage set for cities. And you can see by his drawings that the whole idea of the urban situation, the responsibility of architects, not just to design individual buildings, but in a sense to start creating a theme, which of course has continued till today. The whole idea of theming environments, we can trace back to Sebastiano Serlio around about 1500. So Serlio had an immense effect on modern architecture in that sense, but also the whole idea of perspective. He really stressed the use of perspective and the ways in which perspective could be used in an urban setting. Palladio, probably one of the most famous neoclassical architects. What Palladio did was really refined detail. He didn't really create anything new, but he refined much of what was there already. So modernity, in a sense, when we come right up to about the 16th, 17th, 18th century, it was a movement from the vernacular, or came from the vernacular, and a retreat from classicism. If we, after Serlio and Palladio, probably the most famous text that many architects have said has determined the function of modern architecture was an essay by a French priest, Jesuit priest, Marc-Antoine Laguier. And in 1750, he wrote the Essai sur l'Architecture, which basically proposed that we had to retreat. In order to redefine architecture, we had to go back to the vernacular. And you can see this beautiful lady and this little cherub on the left, pointing to the simplest possible structure. In fact, you could argue it wasn't even a structure because it's still using living trees. But this essay was incredibly important. It was the one essay on architecture that we could say determined modernity. It came from this essay. And you can see attempts on the right here, excuse me, to recreate that simplicity right up to Dimitri Porphyros building in a garden in England, 2005, to reduce architecture to its absolute simplest elements. It's a retreat from, total retreat from classicism that was all about embellishment. And to go for the simplest, absolutely simplest possible elements, the columns, the column heads, the beams, the small truss, the roof, and a restatement of architectural principles that we see are alive and well in Balinese paddy fields. I like wandering about the paddy fields and taking pictures, but some of the little buildings that are built by the farmers are really quite exceptional. And there's particularly this one in the top left, it's almost an exact copy of the drawing on the front of Laguier's book about the development of modernity and modern architecture. It reduces everything to its simplest elements, and it's also still relating to nature in that the farmers used a tree for part of his structure. Excuse me. Now, as we move forward from that period, what was the next big thing that happened after 1750? Well, we have to wait again 150 years because there was really in round about the turn of the century, it's actually called the fin de siècle in French. It was in Vienna. Vienna was a hotspot of creative thinking at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. It was phenomenal. You know, you had Schoenberg in music, you had Freud in psychology, you had Adolf Loos in architecture, and you had a huge battle over the two fundamental theoretical contexts of urban design. And Camillo Sitte wrote this book, City Planning According to Artistic Principles. And I apologize for bringing this up because every urban designer will know this book. It is probably the most famous book that's been written about urban design. And the whole principle here was to retreat back to contextualism. You see that Sitte studied squares, all the European squares in Germany and France, Italy, and the ways in which they were assembled, they're very, very sophisticated, extremely sophisticated. And Sitte, of course, was asked to submit designs for the Ringstrasse in Vienna. And his nemesis was Otto Wagner, who was an architect engineer. And what you had here was a battle that is still continuing today, where the two fundamental theories in urban design, contextualism and rationalism, are still alive and well. You can see it in many urban design, modern urban design or postmodern urban design plans, and you can see the difference. I mean, it's a revolution in thinking, completely different forms of thought. The sanitary considerations, traffic, etc., in Otto Wagner, and the two plans at the top are Otto Wagner's, and the conflict between that and the break with tradition in architecture. And of course, at this point, it gets difficult to separate architecture from urban design. And that's something I've been trying to do all my life. Well, since I left college, or since I started college, is to join these two principles and to try and define in a reasonably clear way the function of architecture in the context of urban design. Because obviously, if you look at Otto Wagner's plans at the top, it determines forms of architecture. You can't take Camillo Sitta's cathedrals and urban spaces across Europe and insert them into a plan of Otto Wagner's. So Otto Wagner and Camillo Sitta really established this big watershed in the development of urban design principles that couldn't actually really be aligned with each other. They were very different. Now, we jump from here. There was no resolution to this conflict. As I say, it's one that's going on at the moment. And we'll see when I show you some slides of Rob Creer's that, in a sense, he's tried to combine the contextual and the rational in some of his work. But the next great attempt to create order in architecture was Corbusier. And Le Corbusier, of course, was a Fibonacci fan, and he wrote two books. Corbusier wrote Modular 1, Modular 2, round about 1943. He was a hero when I was in college, obviously many years later. But you can see the whole obsession with proportion that goes back to the ancient Greeks. And you can see on the right, the picture, a photograph at the top of the Marseille block, which was Corbusier's, which is a very, very famous building in Marseille. There were supposed to be 20 of them, and I think they only built 2. And you can see on the drawing how he uses the Fibonacci series to dictate the proportional systems in the elevations of his buildings, but not just the elevations, he actually used them throughout his buildings. And so the order here, even in up to 1950, was still looking at proportional systems to create order. And the great thing about Corbusier, and for me, is that what do you do with this? Corbusier really abandoned the whole idea of order coming out of structure in the sense of geometric forms, completely abandoned it. I mean, there is, you look at the chapel at Ronchamp, and in a sense, it's probably the most, for me at least, let's put it that way, the most famous building in modern architecture. Not just because it's it's a very unique building, but because it denied all the principles that came before it. It was a revolution. This was a total revolution. It was a revolution in Corbusier's thinking, as well as the thinking of all of his contemporaries, because he challenged them. He said, have a look at this. What are you doing? And of course, he went into symbolism as well, which maybe apocryphal story, but you can see the nuns there with what's called the habit. The habit is the hat that they wear. And his inspiration was supposed to have come from the nuns' hat for the roof of the building. So there was, in a sense, a symbolic relationship between the nuns who were going to be occupying the building and the shape that the building itself adopted. It was totally revolutionary, and it really was an eye-opener. It was probably in my own education in architecture, while there have been hundreds and hundreds of magnificent buildings, they don't make this kind of statement. It's very difficult to make this kind of statement. That's what I think is, as I said, it's probably arguably in denying order. And I think that's what it does. It really denies any, where's the order here? In denying any form of order and creating what looks like a disordered building, created a revolution in architectural theory. Now, this whole principle of classicism and classical architecture in creating order comes right into the present. This is Ricardo Bofill. Ricardo Bofill is actually a Spanish architect, but this project's in France. It's called Abraxas. This is written in Greek here. That's what says Abraxas in Greek. And you can see how the classical building, the whole principle of classicism dominates the entire scheme, right down to if you look at the bottom right here, there's a tiny little entrance there. It's actually an entrance to a Greek temple, where the pediment, the tympanum, the frieze, and all of the details are all there. And then the one on top right, you can see even copied the ways in which the keystones were built to hold arches up and beams. And on the bottom right, it's not a part here, but those are actually classical columns. Those are, Bofill built the entire amphitheater on the principle of column base, column, and the capital at the top. And it's a public housing project, and you can see details of that. So the whole principle of this project here is just riddled with all of the reference that are coming in many ways from 2,500 years ago. Not only that, but today, and again, most of you who are interested in urban design will know the project that this comes from, because you can see again the classical order, and it's minimalist. The top left is minimalist, but it's still classical order. It's still all the principles of classicism. And on the right, same thing again. There's a small Greek temple built on the roof of the administration building in Seaside in Florida. And you will also know that the Seaside in Florida is the icon of the whole principle behind the new urbanism. New urbanism is a movement that started 20 years ago and is basically swept across the United States, Europe, and gone into many other countries in Mexico, in Central and South America. And also in the project that the Prince Charles of England started in Devon and decided that he preferred classical architecture to modernism and modernity. And these are new buildings. This bottom left is the administration building in the little village that he actually set up and created. And here, let's not forget radical postmodernism, which is still using Greek idioms. It's got the huge columns, the column basics, and the Corinthian column heads, the capitals, and then the entablature and the pediment and the form of a classical roof of a classical Greek temple. So if we reconsider this in terms of what's called a reprise, we go reprise of the classical order. That classical Greece, we have the origin of all fundamental architectural principles. Vitruvius, standardization of the elements, Fibonacci, the perfection of proportion using mathematics. From Seri, we get architecture as theater and the concept of theming that's very, very big today. Palladio is the refinement of classical details by illumination. And from Otto Wagner, the extension of classical architectural logic to the urban field, taking basically principles that would have been applied to buildings and applying it to the city. And from Corbusier, we got the totalization of Fibonacci. He took Fibonacci series, and I've forgotten how he actually managed to write 2 books about it, but he did. And in a sense, logic and chaos were perfected in a staggeringly beautiful building in France, in the south of France. Now, after 1950, what was left? Well, there was quite a few things. How about disorder? How do we look at disorder? And it dawned on me that when I was starting to prepare this talk for you, my brain was fundamentally disordered. I didn't start with a structure and work through the thing all nice and cozy. I thought, well, yeah, okay, let me do it this way. So I took all kinds of images that were running through my head. And you can see some of them here. I put them all in a big file. And there's another page of those. That's only one. And you can see the elements that I've been using here. You can see the nun's habit. You can see Corbusier's modular, Serlio's 5 books in architecture, the chapel at Ronchamp. And what I tried to do then was to take this disorder that I saw as being the foundation for my thinking on this, and put it into some kind of pattern that would have meaning. In other words, and I think this is actually the function of creating order from disorder, is to create meaning. It's not actually to create some particularly beautiful architectural forms. Now, 2 books that were incredibly important to me was, as I traveled through architecture and planning, urban design into social science and economics, was Richard Sennett, The Uses of Disorder, Personal Identity and City Life, and The Nature of Order by Christopher Alexander, who has made an immense contribution to architectural theory, and there's actually 4 volumes of that book. And what Alexander was trying to do in discussing and critiquing the nature of order was to avoid environments like this, that if you push order to its ultimate point, this is Ludwig Hilbersheimer's Hochhausstadt, 1924, in Germany. This was his plan. This is what he thought should have been absolutely implemented as a modern city. So you can see you have a choice here. Do we want order to take us this far? If we don't, what kind of disorder helps us to put the brakes on this kind of architectural thinking? This is another system I would suggest, if this doesn't conjure up disorder in your mind, I'm not sure what would. This is another extremely important plan that, again, most urban designers would know about, is Giambattista Nolli's plan for Rome in 1736. It's completely chaotic. And you can see that he's actually pursuing a contextualist approach and almost in the deliberate creation of disorder. He never tried to straighten anything out, and he just used the patterns that were available, very, very much on the principle that Camillo Sitta was doing. Alexander was trying to do something similar in his own kind of way. And again, he wrote some very famous books, and he wrote some rubbish as well. I think that's something we all do. A pattern language was his answer to urban design, where he created I think it was 253 patterns that should be followed in implementing any kind of spatial change to cities. This one showed on the right-hand side here an adventure playground for children, and the kind of elements that adventure playground should contain. And this is pattern number 73. So he says that an architectural pattern expresses a fundamental structure, organization, or schema for software systems. It provides a set of predefined subsystems, specifies their responsibilities, and includes rules and guidelines for organizing the relationships between them. Now, this is a very different way of creating order. And it comes actually from Alexander's education. At Cambridge, he was a mathematician. His master's degree was in mathematics. And his first book was called The Synthesis of Form, which some of you might remember. A brilliant piece of writing about the nature of order in architecture. I think he starts off with a kettle, boiling water, and analyzing the shape, the form of the kettle to pursue the function that it was supposed to take up. So pattern language is very famous, and he did another one called The Timeless Way of Building. This was this one was in a sense of a retreat to the vernacular, going back to vernacular architecture, and trying to develop in a similar way. And you notice he doesn't call it architecture, he calls it building, because Alexander didn't think that the timeless way that is pursued in all societies necessarily has to be come into the realm of architecture and be professionalized. It's something that we should all be able to contribute to. Rob Creer is another great architectural theorist. Two books have always influenced me: The Architectural Composition and Elements of Architecture. And Elements of Architecture is an architectural design journal book. And he works with disorder, or shall we say deliberately creates disorder, so that you could, and by doing that, exposes all the possible solutions. The buildings on the right are all supposed to be on the same site, and there's all these alternative ways of doing things using particular elements. And the Elements of Architectural Composition in one of his books, you can see how he thinks. It's almost like a kit of parts that are disorganized that you then take and you create order from these parts. This is what architects do. So he has a whole vocabulary of staircases, of windows, corner windows, side windows, of columns and different types of columns. And we use this as a sort of, in a sense, a system of disorder from which buildings can actually evolve. Urban Space was his next book after The Architectural Composition, where he takes the same sort of principles and he works with urban space and various types of urban form. You can see arcades on the left, and you can see piazzas or squares on the right. And he fundamentally is using, I guess you couldn't call it a system of disorder, but I think this is very much a system of disorder at the moment. It's not, it doesn't go anywhere. It offers you all kinds of possibilities by creating typologies of spatial forms that are, of course, defined by architecture. So here we get the situation where architecture is actually being defined by urban space rather than the other way around, and as it has been traditionally done. This is something I just picked up a few days ago. It's a website that gives 100 architectural elements that I think all students should know. They should be able to answer questions on any of those elements and know what they are, because it's a basic vocabulary. Again, it's a system of disorder. There's no order to this. They're just elements. They are glued together by choice and by theory. and you just have to go for it. Bernard Tschumi, another very famous French architect. Architecture concepts, red is not color, kind of an interesting idea. He wrote several books on architecture, which to a certain degree I find some of them kind of incomprehensible, but particularly here, but the idea of disorder runs through his work. Tschumi said, I learn about the world through the tools that I have as an architect, and these are some of his tools. I'm not sure that we can go very far in our craft by using tools like that, but you get the idea that what he's saying here really is that he starts with chaos. He starts with chaotic situations and he creates order, and his work is incredible. These are some of his, in a sense, disordered structures, all kinds of choices. There's no conclusions here. The idea is just to take a vocabulary of forms and then in particular context create an order from this vocabulary of forms. And these are developmental sketches that were used from these forms that he then created the Parc de la Villette in Paris. And you can see the little buildings on the right, follies they call them, that people enjoy, but they haven't got any function. And you can see how he's used a grid system of ordering on a rather irregular plan. And then on top of this system of order has created another system of disorder by having pathways and covered ways that run right through and between the location of those buildings. So a reprise on this one, again, is Camillo Sitte, a return to the vernacular in urban terms. Sitte probably being one of the Sitte's work was one of the defining moments in the 20th century. Gave urban design an identity, but at the same time, returned to the vernacular in the same way that Laugier did. The Abbé Laugier, the French priest, who went back to the vernacular to define the modern movement or modern architecture. And in a sense, Sitte was trying to do the same thing. He was trying to return to the vernacular in urban terms. And Nolli, Giovan Battista Nolli, the uses of disorder at an urban scale. Cities don't have to be squeezed into grids, and that there are many opportunities to go away from that system of order and create much more interesting environments by the uses of disorder at an urban scale. Christopher Alexander's vernacular revisionism, in a sense, a retreat back historically into craft, like the arts and crafts movement. His use of psychology, he uses mathematics, he uses psychology. He had, I'm not sure he had a degree in psychology, but he wrote a paper about it. And the whole idea of patterns, Rob Creer creating order through typologies or disorder through typologies to then create something good. And his plan for Creer's plan for Luxembourg is one of the classical plans of the modern period as well, where, if you like, he's integrated some of Camillo Sitte's disorder with Otto Wagner's structure and functionalism. Rob Creer's also got into typologies both of architectural detail and urban form, and because he's a fairly old guy, and I think he's gone through most movements that you can go through and has contributed to all of them. And Bernard Tschumy's ideas of the uses of disorder and assembling order. And the last thought I had was, but the above is only a fragment of what creates order in architecture. what more is needed. And my own attempt really to do that was to write 3 books on urban design, architecture and urban design, 1,000 pages that took me 10 years to do. And the most important thing for me was taking what I saw as disordered, completely disordered knowledge that was floating around in my own head and have to give it some structure. And I know that IU will, in following my talk, will stress the idea that we can't just write papers and books, etc., without actually thinking about how we consider what we're doing. How do we structure what we're doing in a fundamentally useful way? So in a sense, if I have to write a book or a paper, I try to think in some depth about how that should actually be assembled, and without being pragmatic. This was the trilogy, the common framework, theory, history, and philosophy, big. These are determining factors: politics, culture, and gender, environment, aesthetics, and typologies, and then pragmatics. And I hope, interestingly, I don't put any architectural theory in the middle here, such as contextualism or rationalism or aesthetics or modernity or postmodernism. Because for me, spatial political economy really contains the fundamental explanation of how architecture comes about and is distributed in space. But that will have to stay for another time. This was the structure, the 3 books across the top, and the format that I adopted down the left-hand side. And if I had had another couple of years, I might have written it differently. But you have to make decisions. You can't say, well, I can't do it this way because I like to do it that way. And so that's basically, I think, the message that I would like to conclude with is that you really have to first think about the organizing framework within which you're working. And that's what this is. This is a system of thinking about something or other. It's a sort of meta system that, as I said, if you were crazy enough to do it, would probably take you the same time it took me, which was a 10 years worth of work. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Cuthbert, for your presentations. You explained quite in brief about order and disorder, starting from nature order, classical Greek order to modern order in a very complete way. And what fascinates me about your presentation is about when you explain Bernard Sumi that he can combine order and disorder in one design.
Yes.
Maybe we will continue this discussion after a second presentation material.
Very good.
Okay, for the next presentation, shall I invite Gamswartika to present her stuff first, and after second presentation, then we will start the discussion. Okay, Gamswartika, time is yours. Ibu Ayu, ya.
Iya, terima kasih Mas Karel untuk waktunya. Selamat siang, Ibu Bapak semua. Okay. Thank you so much for having me in this event. And I would like, first of all, to thank the organizer for the time, for asking me to join today's event. This is actually my first time joining this, I don't know whether you call it seminar or webinar or whatever it is. It is a pleasure for me to share what I thought about the topic that discussed for the day. To not make it long, please allow me to share my presentation today. Hold on, I got something here that I cannot get rid. Hold on. Okay. Oh. I need to share my presentation and then, okay. Oh God. Hold on. Sometimes working with this system is a little bit annoying when you can't get rid of something that you don't want to see. So, hold on. Okay, now I get it. Sorry. Okay. Is my presentation already seen by everybody? Is that?
Yes,
visible?
everything all right. Yep.
That's good. Thank you. Okay. Today's presentation of mine is entitled "The Message and the Code: Architecture of the Nusantara." And when I was approached by Ibu Siwa to have something to say about order in the architecture of the Nusantara, I was thinking, what can I say about order in architecture of the Nusantara? Because when we are talking about order in architecture, we are faced and we are always presented by a long tradition of architectural development, and that didn't take place in our part of the world. And order in architecture is a term used and evolved in centuries in the European continent, and we are always presented with Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, Tuscan, and composite, and that's all we are presented with. So when I was approached to do something about this order in architecture of the Nusantara, what can I say? We don't have that tradition. And then also, in fact, when we talk about the architecture of the Nusantara, then we are presented with all kind of a little bit and not a little bit and pieces. By me saying a little bit and pieces is what I'm presented you with on my slides. We are presented with colorful build forms that represents every single unit of, or if I can say, ethnicity. We are presented with a different form of geographical position. We are presented with a totally different, what should I say, build forms across the Nusantara. So how do we read order of the Nusantara? And before even we can ask that question, do we have order in Nusantara, order in architecture of the Nusantara in the way order is understood when we talk about architecture of the world, or architecture when it comes to order in architecture, we tend to go back to the architecture of the European continents that then spread to different parts of the world. And even to me, is more challenging is, let's face it, we are having in the Nusantara close to over 1,340 ethnicities. And we have over 170 or close to 180 local languages, not accent. I'm not talking about accent here, but I'm talking about language. So, so talking about order in architecture, it's often Nusantara is very challenging. then I tell myself later on, then what will I do? And then I decided to go back to what we have. And what we have is colorful architecture, form of architecture from all over the Nusantara. And the only thing we can talk about is our vernacular architecture. So, like it or not, some may oppose my position in this case, but the best I can do when we are talking about, and my understanding about order a little bit will be diverted from what has been presented by Professor Cuthbert earlier. So let me reiterate the structure of my presentation today, which composed with 5 different subtopics, which are, first of all, I will re-emphasize how we understand order in the context of architecture of the Nusantara, and then followed by how order in the architecture of the Nusantara is derived, and then how order is manifested in the architecture of the Nusantara, and then continued by how order in the architecture of the Nusantara can be transformed, and then at the end is challenges ahead. So this seems to be what I'm trying to do here. It seems to be very enthusiastic, but again, if I can't go ahead in a further detail, but I just would like to present a complete idea. So here is not just we are talking just the order in architecture of the Nusantara, but I'm also given myself, at least myself, and hope I also forward the same message that why do I even talk about order in architecture of the Nusantara? That's why, that's how the kind of thought that comes to my mind when I was formulating this presentation of mine. So let's go with the first one. How order is understood in the context of architecture of the Nusantara. So order in architecture in general here is my understanding is about rules. It is about how it is done or how it is to be done. So I'll forward the words of rules, and then okay, let's stick with that, and then we talk about rules and what is rules in terms of architecture of the Nusantara. As we all very well know that our culture is not slightly different than those of the let's say the western part of the world, but when it comes to rules, we talk about undocumented. Our culture is mostly undocumented culture. So because we are talking rules in terms of with undocumentation of it, so I will focus on codes, rules that undocumented, sorry. And then, but codes that I'm talking about here possess commanding powers in form, symbolic messages, as well as meanings. So sticking with that idea, okay, and then I come about with the title of today's presentation, The Message and the Code in the Architecture of the Nusantara. Why is that important? Yeah, because that's who we are. And I would like to underline the fact that I'm going back to the vernacular architecture we have across the Nusantara. That is our identity. That is what signifies us. Okay, if we look at what probably those of you who use social, yeah, then what signify us? What is the signifying element? So and then in this case, I particularly talk about architecture as a form of communication. I borrowed the idea of E.T. Hall, one of the anthropologists in the 20th century, and I use his way of looking at communication architecture. Just my statement, architecture as a form of communication. The thought come from E.T. Hall, and I use it when I was formulating my book, my first book, Morphing Bali, Planning, State, and Culture. So, and I also hope you share the humor that I found out. It's I was given this mug at some point, and then I love it. And then I thought this is not just humor, it's very true. It says like, I speak 4 languages: English, profanity, sarcasm, and architecture. So here, architecture, it is a form of communication, and go along with how E.T. Hall defined communication. When it comes to talking about communication, it is a language. So architecture itself is a form of language. And I stick with that in this presentation. And then how I would like to share my understanding about order, how I look at order in terms of the architecture of the Nusantara. I move to the second one, to the second topic of discussion for today, is how order in the architecture of the Nusantara is derived. Now, this is a tricky bit. And why I say it is tricky, because to be honest, I've never looked at the architecture of the Nusantara in terms of order. I was privileged enough a few years back, I was endowed with research grants to study what do you call it? Home of the Nusantara, and then I studied mainly focusing on without overlooking others. I was focusing my research on 3 different form of homes across the Nusantara, and then I use the thought that I gathered from that research when I formulated this presentation. So based on that, then I look at how rules, okay, and then how messages, how codes are derived in the architecture of the Nusantara. And I found, of course, this is probably not inclusive enough, but I found 4 determining elements. They are myth, belief, nature and resources, and social order. Now, how they can be, these 4 elements can be defining factors in looking at codes and messages in the architecture of the Nusantara. They can work singularly. Okay, so each element determine a specific codes, messages, and rule, or one or more of them combined concurrently. They can work together and then build signifying rules in our build form. So let's go one by one now. Okay, so I'll go in further detail, but probably I'll not deep into very detailed explanation, but of course that I'm happy to discuss it further later on during Q&A session. Let's go with the first one, myth. I go with myth. What is myth actually? So we learn from, I would like to go back to always just to give us a clear understanding what we are talking about. So at least I go back to the root, which is a dictionary, and then Oxford Dictionary informs us very well that what myth is: a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of origin, explaining a natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. So in simple language, we can say myth mostly to do with the origins, our origins. So, and what is the examples of it in our that underline our vernacular architecture across the archipelago? For example, the Torajan people believe their ancestors originated from Indochina, went down to the south and ended up in the Tanah Toraja. And also the Torajan people, they believe that they have ancestral ties with people of Minahasa and Dayak. So, and then how this form of myth represented in the build form. Tongkonan of Toraja, peculiar form of roof, possession of the lumbung, stilt house of Minahasa, and rumah panjang of Dayak community. If we learn about these three form of homes, then we clearly can what do you call it? Maybe not only learning, but also, what should I say the words? Deep into it, dig deep into it, that their homes are representation of their myth. So, and this is a representation of Toraja homes, and I'm sure most of you are already very familiar of this. And then the Minahasa, the Kalimantan, the Dayak homes of the Kalimantan, and then recapping to that in terms of myth, what is the representation of architectural order derived from myth? We can learn from shape, we can learn from build form, we can learn from orientation. Okay, so and then the next one is belief. What is belief? An acceptance that something exists or is true, especially when it comes to something that cannot be proven. Trust, faith, confidence in something or someone. Okay, so example of it, it's being Balinese, then a lot I can present in terms of belief. What do you call it? The inclusion of belief in our build form. Okay, so this covers belief in the existence of invisible forces, creator, ancestor, nature, the underworld, or believe in a figure. It's like people get mad with Elvis Presley, and then they're making a unique representation of him once he passed away. And then how the representation of belief in the build forms. Architecture of the Balinese, a lot, and I'm sure Balinese architecture is one of, I believe, to my understanding, is one of form of architecture that very well studied and very well, what do you call it, and investigated in Indonesia. So I don't want to go any further detail on this one. And then, so what is the representation of belief in the order, in the rules? It's in its orientation, building composition, the use of decorative elements, and leveling to represent spatial hierarchy. And I move to the next one. I'm just a bit concerned with the timing that I have. I'm sorry. And then the third determining element is geographical position that will determine available natural resources, climate, potential natural disasters caused by the geographical position, geological condition, and etc. An example of this is topographic condition. Many areas are prone to earthquake and volcanic eruption. And we all know about the Bukit Barisan, Bali, of Gunung Agung, and then we just probably a few days ago we found out that Maluku has experienced a major earthquake, the tsunami, and all those things affect our build forms, how we formulate our circle. Let's put it that way. So this also very well represented in how the Balinese vernacular architecture has been constructed. The existence of stilt houses across the Celebes Island, the Sumatra and Kalimantan Islands, the existence of or the use of pitch roofs practiced across the Nusantara, the wide use of natural building materials, and then house structure and construction, including their detail. The use of dowels is very, very prominent in response to a topographic and geographical position that we have across the Nusantara, and then the use of nature-inspired decorative elements. So, hold on, that's this is a couple of illustrations that we can corroborate the idea of order in relation to nature and resources. You can have a look at the illustrations I presented here, and also our architecture. Talking about nature, look at the decorative elements used in Tongkonan. All are inspired by the sun, rice, the kerbau, okay? And then and the color as well. They are all representing particular messages, and also the way they are located. They are just simply located everywhere. No, there is a rule when you can use the kerbau, when you can use the padi, the bulir padi, and when you use red color, white color, black color, or yellow color. There are four basic colors used in the decorative elements of the Toraja people, and these are all, they are provided with amazing bamboos that they are widely using in the construction of Tongkonan. And then the kerbau is not just a decorative element, but it means glory, and that's very important representation in the Tongkonan. And even this is a graveyard for the graveyard for babies in the what do you call it, in Toraja. And the repression of order coming from nature and resources, it's like in the form of, again, architectural form, building structure, detailed construction, decorative elements. And then now we head to the last one of the derivative of the order in the Nusantara, is the social order. The society that creates the build form and to whom it is dedicated to support the continuity of their life. So these include social groups, social interactions, gender, social association, rules, code, consensus, and sanctions. And this social order is very well represented when we learn about gadang houses, home for the female members of the family. Tongkonan houses, it's a representation of, what do you call it? A conception. This is a home you are born to and to pay ancestral debts. In Balinese mainland house, home is a representation of the man. And the scale of the Balinese home is based on who owns the home. Okay? Long houses of the Kalimantan representing a communal life, and then the presence of Nata in the Balinese mainland houses that strengthen the social ties, and then the presence and the absence of fences in many vernacular architecture of the Nusantara, and yeah, and goes on and goes on and goes on. And what illustration can we use to support that statement? Look at the gulak of the Balinese, the first picture here. And then this one, the Rumah Adat Batang of the Kalimantan Tengah. I'm sorry, I haven't managed to redraw this. And then this is the formation of the Balinese compound homes. Okay, so, and this is again the Minangkabau, one example of Minangkabau plan of the Minangkabau home. Okay, so number of rooms will be determined by how many women in the family. So society determine how we build. Okay, so how the social order, sorry, not the society. And in this case, we are talking about gender. Okay. So enough of that. And now we go to the third topic of today's discussion. It is how order is manifested in the architecture of the Nusantara. This actually just a summary of what we talked before, how the four elements, myth, belief, social order, and nature and resources affect order. So now we can propose where we have proposed where order comes from, and then in what form order are what do you call it? Conform in the architecture of the Nusantara. I got 10 conformants here. Okay, the first one is shape and structure, form, orientation, function, spatial formation and hierarchy, material in use, structure and construction, scale. I think scale is the unique one, and decorative and aesthetical elements, embedded meaning, symbolic representation. And if these 10 elements mean something, it will imply and it will force us to think of these 10 elements when we are discussing the next topic. That's why I specifically put it as a summary what we learned from rules, codes, and form in the previous topic of discussion. Okay, so the next one is how order can be transformed. So what I'm going to present here, probably some I have published based on previous publication in an article called Vernacular Transformation, as well as in books, Vernacular Transformation, Architecture, Place, and Tradition. So I think when we are discussing about how order can be transformed, this I think it will be a delight to many architects that thinking of what do you call it? Framing their line of work, their line of profession within a thought of extending traditions and extending messages and codes embedded within the build form traditions. Okay, so it is come to a realization that how do we do this? You know, how do we do this? If tradition in build form should be extended, the existence should be extended. How are we going to do it? So I always, as I think Professor Cuthbert earlier already underlined, that we have to have a framework how we do it. Now, again here, I'm lining my presentation with the original thought. The presentation is about codes and messages. And code and messages in this context is all about symbolic meanings. Now, in order to deliver that symbolic meanings, use our what we design, what we have in terms of build form to deliver, to use it as a form of communication, as a language, as a way for us to send a message, to send a code. And what codes we are sending here, the order that contained within the architecture of the Nusantara. How do we do it? We can do it in a way, I'm sure some of this method has been implemented in one way or another. Okay, so we can approach it using conception of metaphor, analogy, mimesis, totemism, animism, aesthetics, structure, form, and function. So let's go one by one. The first one, symbolism. This is our final goal, actually. Symbolism. We would like to send a message. We communicate through our architectural products. If I were an architect practicing professionally, so through our design. So, but since I'm an academic here, and then I approach it, that would be offering a way for me to look at transformation of vernacular architecture into the current architectural practice. I cannot say it is a modern architecture or postmodern architecture or new urbanist way of looking at things. I leave that with the individual to interpret it. Okay, so symbolism, symbolic meanings, the semiotic representation of belief, ideology, philosophy, or material things. And it comes across to my attention what the Valley cosmology West Africa and how they transform their cosmology in their build form. So this is an interesting one, I think, and also this is the second thing that I come across with, and I don't repeat because I don't repeat some illustration that I used earlier, but we can easily use illustration of many local architecture that represent symbolic meanings. Okay, so and this is in Seri community in West Africa as well. So this is a very interesting. So the second one, how we can transform order in architecture, and metaphoric approaches, indirect representations. Okay, so this is what Charles Moore is doing. This is the architects, the left-hand corner, when he constructed Piazza d'Italia, New Orleans. So what basically he does is he borrows several several ideas from the mainland of Italia to construct the piazza for the Italian people, for the Italian community. It's not necessarily coming from just one place. The idea he presented here coming from several places across the mainland Italy. So can we do this for our what do you call it? Constructing a build form that represent several unit of our traditional architecture across the Nusantara? I believe we can. Just that whether that's the approach we choose to, okay, in transforming or in extending our traditional architecture. And then the second method is animism. This is the attribution of living soul to inanimate objects and natural phenomenon. This is a copy. What we what do you call it? What nature has that catch our interest, and then we copy it, and then we represent it. And I believe the formation of Art Nouveau in the context of European architectural development, it's deeply inspired by what nature has. So this is animism, and then again the fourth is sorry, not the fourth, the third actually, analogy. And analogy, when it comes to analogy, it's we transform the our traditional forms into what we are designing at the current stage. So we are borrowing the form. Okay, so and most of the time we are literally okay, borrow the form and transform it, not exactly as it is in its original form, but we can add our creativity to it. And this is TP. I'm sure everybody knows the TP of the Indian in America, and how it is transformed to a home. So, and I also come across with this one when talks about analogy, the Masjid Raya of the Padang. And also this might well represent the analogy of the Gadang, the slendering, what do you call it, figure of the Minangkabau home. And this is a 5, if I'm not mistaken, this is a front side of a park in the Netherlands. And this is the House of 5 Cents, if I'm not mistaken, the name of it. And also analogy, we learn from what Miss van der Rohe did in his Barcelona pavilion. He was inspired by the traditional Japanese house, and then also he also very well represented the concepts of a traditional Japanese house in his Farnsworth house, in the design of Farnsworth house of Miss van der Rohe. I think analogy is something that very, what do you call it, very absorbable and frequently used from time to time. Okay, so when we are talking about transformation of past architecture. Now the fourth method is aesthetics, belonging to the appreciation of the beautiful, and this is I think has been well done as well. And in Bali especially, how the elements of Balinese compounds, the beauty of it, the Balinese landscaping conception and practices are widely absorbed by the current built forms exist, I believe, not only in Bali, but also in different parts of the world. So this is the illustration I got to support the idea, and this is the Santorini Corbusier Ronchem. I noticed that Professor Cuthbert also used this image earlier, the aesthetic of the nun hats, and then absorbed by Corbusier to in his design in Corbusier Ronchem. And the next one is, the fifth one, is learning from the past structure. The capacity to resist nature through the use of materials, technology, so in construction. And this is the Bedouin tent, and how the Bedouin tent and then absorbed by pre-auto tensile structure. And then also in terms of the architecture of the Nusantara, and how the structure of the Wantilan in Bali is well absorbed by many architects designing hospitality designs in Bali, and also how exposed structure is also very well absorbed in many architectural design currently. So the next one is the sixth is form, how form is perpetuated, the past form perpetuated by the current architects. And also this is the house of Batak, and exists in Belgium. How form of house Batak is oh sorry, not Belgium, in Germany. Okay, so and this is a form of the Balinese temples repeated in Belgium. Okay, so and also talking about perpetuating form in architecture, we can learn a lot from Hassan Fatih, an Egyptian architect. So and then the next one is function, transforming the function of the traditional architecture. This is the igloo, and how the igloo form and then transform to the current architecture, and Paulo Solero in Arizona. Okay, so we can learn a lot about transformation of function in a way, how function is promoted, very well promoted in the Japanese architecture. The simplicity of it has been a foundation in architectural ideas proposed by the modern movement in architecture. So we can learn a lot from in terms of function, how function can be transformed. And the next one is the eighth method is mimesis, and this is a close external resemblance in the manner in which a child learns. And I think the idea of mimesis is similar to the idea of what do you call it? Form. When we talk about transforming form earlier. And this is the Parthenon of the Greek temple, and how it is repeated in many buildings in the America. I think this is the Lincoln Memorial Building, this one, the one here. So and it's very well used in state court as well. The idea of the Parthenon temple, and how mimesis, the idea of mimicking Parthenon temples to the current architecture is very well used. And I also believe the idea of repeating the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian form. It is a form of mimicking the past architecture. That's how order come about. And also this is the adobe, ethnic adobe, Tau Poble, yeah, Tau Poble. I like to say it, Tau Poble. So anyway, so and then the last one, yeah, the last one, how we can transform the tradition is totemism. Natural or other object assumed as relational emblem of clan or individual. I don't know how applicable this one is, the idea, but it is interesting. And the example I've got here is interesting. This is Renzo Piano traditional Kanak Grand Art Design, which is the building called John Marie Jibao Cultural Center. And actually this is in New Caledonia, one of the, what do you call it? One of the colony of the past colony of France, I think. So yeah, this is how Renzo Piana borrow the significant Kanak culture in his design of John Marie Jibao. I don't know how to read it, I'm sorry. John Marie Jibao Cultural Center. Okay, so now enough of that. Then I arrive at the last topic of discussion for today. So we learn about order, how order is represented, and then how order can be transformed. And then what next? Of course, things aren't going to be easy. So in order to walk through all the path, so we will definitely find challenges. Then I'm not going to present here how to solve a problem, okay? Or to solve challenges that may be in the way when we are transforming the vernacular architecture, but instead I would like to propose a way of looking at the challenges. So the way I'm going to present in the next slide, I borrow from or inspired by how we approach when Professor Cuthbert and myself published several book chapters and in a book called Home, Design and Architecture from Prehistory to Today. What we did at that time is we create a framework and how we build up our framework before we approach the case. So this is not about how we bang our head and solving problem, but instead we think about that and how we are looking at the challenges. So this is an example how we approach it. We learn about how challenges are deriving. Okay, so or how we can make it as a theme, or probably in the context of architecture, we would like to term it as what typology. Okay, what typology we would like to have here, or how we structure it. So then we can probably, in our case, we put it as a theme, what theme that we are going to propose here. So, and then the architects, or we are in the architectural field and we like to talk about archetype. And then what is in the archetype? And then what forms come with that specific archetypes? And then what examples we can propose? And where we can learn it from, that comes sources at the end. So that's the framework so what I'm trying to say here is challenges would be there, But in order for us to go through the challenges, we need a framework. And how we do our framework? So this is what I'm proposing, because challenges in architecture is not just about architecture. Probably if we can learn from Levi-Strauss, when he is composing his, what do you call it, structuralism, he was talking about culture. And he was saying that culture all over the world, the elements are all the same, but how it is represented are different. So, and he was also saying that culture should be looked at in terms of a system. And culture cannot be just talk, we just cannot talk about culture. Okay, culture is about about way of life. Yeah, of course, way of life. Somebody like to eat nasi goreng, not because probably that's what he really liked, because that's all he has. That's because rice is that's all available, form of carbohydrate available in Indonesia. But let's say if we ask him or her to eat pasta, to eat potato, to eat sorghum, his preference might be different. So his preference to eat nasi goreng is not because, probably not because of that's what all he wants, but that's because that's what available. So it's like so it is important when we go through the challenges, we work out a system. So what is a system? So a system here is mechanisms that survive on its own. It's a wholeness. Yeah? So, and when we are talking about transformation, the system as well will work out how it is to be transformed. Now, this is when order come about. Okay, so since this is order, this is code, this is rules, and it has to have the capacity to regulate itself. Okay, so that's what the property of the system. So what is in the system? Now, there are 5 elements that we have to look at: the environment, the structure, resources it has, what the objectives are, and how it behaves. So that's all. Once we figure it out, and then we can identify what challenges ahead in transforming the order in the architecture of Danusantara. Okay, so with this, I would like to thank everybody for for your attention, and terima kasih Suksma. Thank you for listening, and I would like to hand the time back to Mas Karel. Thank you, Mas Karel.
Okay, thank you, Bugam Swartika. You already explained about manifestation, transformation, and challenges of order in architecture. Thank you for your material. And now we continue into our discussion. So I already received like 5 questions related to both presentation. Shall I read it? The first question is from Siwalatri. What is the relationship between order or disorder with meaning in architecture? Or is order are made to express meaning? Can you answer and share your ideas about this question? Cuthbert or Swartika, please.
I think that we talk about designing, postmodernism was about designing meaning back into buildings. Because modernism really was about getting rid of detail, excess detail, and postmodern was about putting it back. But I think the important thing about that question is that the meaning is not in the object. It's in how the individual interprets it. In other words, you could take something like religion. Well, it depends on, the meaning comes from how people interpret what that's going to be. So I think in a sense, we're looking at it the other way around, you know, rather than looking at how order is created in objects and processes or situations or geography. Rather how the individual, I guess this is a kind of existentialist kind of position, very much perhaps like, who's that guy that wrote Order? There's another book by
Desartre.
Desartre, yeah, about how these meanings are constructed. But I think in a simple way, the meaning is not something that you look at and it's not there to be interpreted the same way by everybody, which means the meaning exists in you. It doesn't exist out there in some kind of concrete shapes or steel or glass. So that's the reality. I'm getting a fantastic echo here. How do we get rid of that?
Yeah, because there are two mic open. I think because you're close each other, when one is speaking, the other should mute themselves, so there's no echoing.
Okay, very good. Okay.
So Bugam, tadi kan ada agak echo, soalnya ada dua mic yang deketan.
Oh.
Jadi kalau biar nggak echo, salah satu harus dimatiin. Now you're muted, but I
don't mind.
Okay, I think it's yours.
Okay.
Yeah, now it's your opinion, Swartika.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to ask him to repeat the question. And then he's forgotten.
No, then I think I remember it. Yeah, the Ibusiwa's question was about what is the relationship between order and disorder, isn't it?
And meaning.
And meaning, is it?
Meaning related with the order in architecture.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, is the interesting part is order. In the West, order is very what do you call it? I would prefer order in a Western conception of the architecture is about what do you call it? Arrangement that has been well thought. But disorder come about when we talk about order as architecture developed. So let's say the modern approach in architecture, it's trying to simplify things. Simplification is the way. But then when it comes to postmodern architecture, they would like to break it again. So to me, it's not about the meaning here, but it is about a process. And order can be disorder when, let's say, we are standing in a postmodernist, we are standing on the side of postmodernist approach. Then what is considered order in modern architecture, it's probably not order in postmodern architecture. So this is about a process. And that process goes back to what's happening when the thought come about. So when we talk about meaning, it's everything contextual. So the relationship is not about order and disorder, but the relationship about order with what's happening when that form of what do you call it, arrangement surfacing. So it's a mix up a little bit, and I know, and I agree with what Professor Cuthbert just saying just now. This is very existentialism. It is. Busiwa question is It's something that we cannot grasp just like that, but we have to dig in what we understand about order. Order is everything in line, disorder is everything not in line. Probably that's how we understand it, but it is not about the what we visibly see, but the reason behind the emergence of order and disorder, and that is the meaning. That's all I can say.
So Artika, when
I know it's confusing, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, but I remember that in your presentation, you're saying that myth, belief, nature, and social, both 4 factors are creating the order and in architecture. So is that true that you're saying if there's in condition of disorder, there will be no meaning? Is that what you're saying? Or
no, yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. No, no, that's not the message I would. That's not the message I would like to deliver. But what I'm saying is order and disorder is very contextual. You know, let's say if I'm talking about, let's say I'm of course, you know, my background is having being Balinese. Then when I'm looking at the architecture, let's say the architecture of Tongkonan, and then I said, oh, that's a bit of disorder there. Because probably disorder is about idea, order itself is about idea. Now, when we talk about idea here, we talk about something very subjective. And depending what my understanding about what I call order or what I call disorder, and likewise probably somebody else. So what meaning behind disorder and order is going back to what view I'm standing in when I'm understanding the meaning, you know, I mean, the meaning derived from that order and disorder. So no, I'm sorry, it's not, I'm not saying outside the 4 elements then disorder, no. I don't, in my presentation, I didn't even touch disorder. I think disorder comes with Professor Cuthbert.
Okay, Cuthbert, this is related with your explanation about, I think you explain about the uses of disorder by Richard Sennett, isn't it? And you're saying about how Bernard Sumi combined disorder and order into a very fantastic and phenomenal design. Can you explain more about that? Because there will be another question related with disorder.
It's at one level, it's very easy. Can you take your phone?
Please unmute your mic, Alexander Cuthbert, and mute Swartika muted. Yeah.
And what about the video? That one? Okay. Yeah. At some level, it's very simple. That order and disorder are the same thing.
I agree
in some ways, because it's like you take a city, you know, or the one generation tries to create order, and 10 years later they're tearing it down and creating another order. So to a certain extent, there's no permanence really about order. And the other thing about order really is that, and I think this is what Richard Sennett was talking about, that if you push order to its limit, where every single detail, every single item is ordered, would you want to stay in a place like that? So what Richard Sennett was actually talking about was not exactly, in a sense, the uses of disorder, but the fear of order. I mean, fascist Germany, you know, Hitler's Germany was an example of taking order right down to every single degree, the way children are educated in a specific way in accordance with fascist principles and genetics, and it went on like that. And so I think that we have to be a little bit afraid of what order is. And I think that it's like look at children. I mean, you can't. They live in disorder. They love it, and that's how they educate themselves. So you can't say that disorder is bad, because it's actually a fundamental part of all of our learning and all of our experience. So in a set, when I say order and disorder, I mean, I hate to go back to the whole yin-yang theory of Chinese philosophy and stuff. I mean, as you know, I studied Tai Chi Chuan for 15 years and practiced for like 30. And it's this union of opposites. I mean, I think that we're in a particularly Western mode of thinking here. You've got order, you've got disorder, and they're separate things, and one affects the other, but they're not the same. Whereas what I'm trying to suggest is that they are the same in the sense that they give each other meaning. Meaning is transferred from order to disorder and from disorder to order. It's just like that yin-yang diagram. You can't take one piece away and talk about the other bit. So you must, and I think actually this is problem in architecture, has been for a long time, is this idea that everything has to be ordered, everything has to be structured properly. You don't want your buildings to fall down, so order applies differentially across the design process, whereas the maximum amount of chaos you can create at the beginning is probably the best design context you can think of, as long as you actually end up with a product that your client is actually going to enjoy. So.
Okay, thank you, Corbusier. Nice. There's another questions from Bonifacio Bayu Sanasaputro. His question is, order in general terms should represent the rules in designing a composition or organization of shape, form, and space, even details. Is there any significant understanding of disorder applied in Nusantara architecture origins? Maybe this question is fit for you, Swartika, please.
Yeah, thank you. To my understanding, disorder in architecture in the Nusantara, I've never come across. I've been teaching in architectural department for quite a while now, and reading some textbook on the architecture of the Nusantara. The conception of order and the conception of disorder in the architecture of the Nusantara barely exists, and it doesn't exist. I don't know if any of you come across with that. And as I said at the beginning, do we have order? Let alone we haven't talked about disorder in the architecture of the Nusantara. That's why then I propose order here, probably rule. Okay, if we agree with that, we are talking about rule. What set of a framework that we have to conform to in architecture. So is there any correlation, disorder in the architecture of the Nusantara? I'll let you to answer that. Okay, so why? Because it depends on that 4 determining factor that I was talking about earlier. How much we attach, let's say how much we attach to the myth that's saying the Torajan people coming from the Indochina. And when I say, oh, there might be no written fact that's saying that people of the Torajan, Tanah Toraja, coming from the Indochina. But when we talk about DNA, there is a similarity between DNA of people in Tanah Toraja and people of the Indochina. Then here we are talking about now if that is a form of order, and then we would like to retain it, then okay, I would like always to connect with my ancestor. Then okay, then Tongkonan is an important part to confirm to, or we have to perpetuate the existence of Tongkonan home, because we would like to always relate to our ancestor. But if we don't do it, it is a disorder, and I don't believe so, to my view, because disorder is fun. Okay, disorder is fun. And in fact, last night, I was just watching a program on TV, and this is a group of people going somewhere, and everything was so well regulated. And then the first comment I made was, oh, this is boring. Yeah, why do we people need to go there when things are so well kept, well regulated, and preserved well, and everything was so in order, and I thought it was boring. But when I was presented with things, disorder is a challenge. And like, let's say now, if I don't build, I don't conform with the Balinese way of forming my home, and I'm given a challenge. And that is a challenge to I think, to every architect that hasn't been answered. Okay, so I think order and disorder is, are two determining, equally determining factor in the formation of architectural design. And it is important, both equally important, when we talk about transforming the traditional architecture of the Nusantara. So that's all I can say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Swartika. Let me ask Bonifacio myself. Bonifacio, are you still here? Are you satisfied with Swartika's answer?
Yes, I think that would be a good answer from Mrs. Swartika, because in my mind, they are probably in the development of the Nusantara architecture itself is probably not only taking place by the original things. There is something that developed by its social condition, and also with the trend that which is not came along with the origination things. Because in origin, I can agree with you that order is pretty much boring than the disorder, because we also can make something brand new, and then something that we might want to approach with a different style of meaning, as especially in Nusantara architecture. And by the way, thank you for the answer, Miss. That will be a good answer. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bonifacio. Let's move on to next questions. Next question is from Karstein. When we consider social order in the order of architecture, there might be exercising of hegemony power within the society daily lives. So how this hegemonic power is exercised, embeds, and negotiated in generating or perhaps transforming the order of architecture? I think this question is for both of you, Cuthbert and Swartika. Please answer.
Yeah, this is something that I was hoping to not have to talk about because it's the subject that I like best. And I have avoided so far talking about spatial political economy, which is basically what the question's about. Because the reason why I went from architecture to urban design to urban planning was I was always dissatisfied with the explanations that I was being given. And so when I did my PhD, I went to London School of Economics and Political Science and said, can I be the first architect that you've that you've accepted? Because they're all economists and politicians. Because I wanted an explanation of architecture that came out of something fundamental. You know, when I was a college student, it was technology or aesthetics. Which one do you want? You know, it was an aesthetic approach or it was a technology approach. That's architecture. But architecture is the envelope of the entire human race. So we have to have more fundamental explanations about what architecture is. You can't just put it down to, you know, representations of a particular club or society or group of people. And so my position that I have adopted for the last 15 years or so is spatial political economy, which says that everything starts with the relationship between society, economy, and politics. The patterns of land use, patterns of land tenure, class structures, investment patterns, all dictate how architecture pops to the surface. You know, it's not dictated, this isn't dictated by architects. Architects are like the last little tiny bit on the space rocket, once 95% of the decisions have actually been made, you know? So and it's the same, my approach to urban design was based on that spatial political economy. And so I think that in one sense, the question is very difficult to answer. But I think it's easier if you just say, look, why don't you just abandon traditional approaches to architecture, and you will find reason there. You will never be able to explain it from looking at any kinds of superficial structures of order that have been created. You have to look below it, you know, at what kind of social system has been developed and the spatial patterns that come out of it. I mean, when I was discussing the idea of the Nusantara with Ibu Ayu, it seemed to me that because of the diversity of the cultures, no uniform explanation could possibly be made unless it was on the one hand symbolic and on the other hand political and economic. Because it also deals, I mean, political economy deals with the level of development of a society. Now, in the Nusantara, that level of development is pretty much, in a sense, stuck in medieval social relations and patterns. Even in Bali, it's just a little bit like that too. I mean, the adat is not a modern system of government. It's, you know, 150 or 200 or 300 years old. So we're actually looking at the ways in which the thing that unifies the Nusantara, I think, are the processes that have been set in place from the point of view of political economy that create spatial structures, and these spatial structures evolve into architecture. And so from that point, from that way of looking at it, it's fairly straightforward.
Okay, thank you, Cuthbert. How about your opinion, Swartika? Please.
Yeah. To me, what is the relationship between power, the hegemony of power, to the transformation of the architecture of the Nusantara?
Yeah.
I think my view would be going back to what I say as a system. So if we attach to what system is, something that has its wholeness, its way of transforming itself, and has the power to regulate, and then if we adhere to that view, the transformation is powerless. And if the transformation should is going to be done by the architects. So the architect is powerless. If what is done by the architect is called architecture, so architecture is powerless. Because the reason for me to say that is because it is a form dictated by the 5 elements of the system that I mentioned earlier, defined by the behavior, where the behavior by who are using it, defined by the environment, where the architectural forms are going to be. If the environment has 4 different climate features, so the existence of the created architectural form would be different if it is going to be placed in a tropical country. So what I'm saying here, if the relation we are talking about here is the process of transformation, it is a powerless system. It is a powerless process. But on the other hand, if it is a powerless process, what it is then? It is a process of conforming to what is in the system. So if in the system is these 5 the elements that I mentioned in my presentation, the structure, the environment, the resources, and the behavior, and the objective. So it's powerless because it is placed within a system. So, and how it is read, let's say in what do you call it? A case that I used earlier in my presentation, the longhouse of the Dayak home in the Kalimantan. It's a very well structured. I don't know, of course, because I got what do you call it? A strong admiration of a traditional home. So it's the longhouse is very well structured, dictated by social order. You can't just simply sit down wherever you want. You sit down where you are instructed to sit on. And likewise, many, like in Tenganan, for example, in the all those Baliagung they have in the middle of the linear settlement they have, you cannot go up and sit down or even just step your foot on if you are not part of the community. So, so the existence of a building, even in the past, not in the past, still now, it's still dictated by a form of social order. So in this case, if we are going to transform such a build form, how are we going to do it if we want to bridge this gap? So we don't have anything else but to conform, because the idea is to retain how we conform it, how we follow the order. That is the question that we have to address. Every architect who are attached to the idea of conservation of the architecture product, then that's a question that hasn't been answered. And I remember we have in the master's program of architecture of Udayana University, I remember we had a workshop one time, a workshop followed with a seminar, specifically discusses the idea, how are we going to transform our tradition in built form? Hasn't been answered up to now. And even the Architects Association of Indonesia in Bali, they keep looking for that one and then keep approaching us to organize something. So at least they have a guidance that how we love our architecture. We would like to have it not only for us, for our next generation. So how do we do it? when we are challenged with disorder, if we would like to say disorder. So disorders are what we are faced now. Order is what we have in our architecture tradition. Okay, so how do we carry this forward so our future generation will still have it? So that was I was talking, how we transform it. So I think that's more important aspects of today's discussion. How do we understand order in the architecture of the Nusantara, especially? Thank you.
Thank you, Swartika. I want to hear what's KG or Karsten opinion about your both answer. I don't know, Karsten is still here or not? Hello, Karsten, are you still here? Please turn your mic on. I don't think that he's still around.
He's hiding.
Yeah, because I just checked the participant name and I can't find his name. By the way, when I heard what Swartika said that transformation of architecture is powerless, it's a little bit sad to hear that. Do you agree with me or not? That it means that whatever we've done, we are still powerless.
Of course, when I express that, it's probably there was an element of exaggeration. Of course, by powerless in a sense, it doesn't mean that we don't count who we are. And understanding being an architect is the fact that architects is a creative profession. But will you be what do you call it? Will you be discouraged by the fact that by the fact of a statement that transformation is a powerless process? Of course not. This is not a dead end. And if we learn about how culture is what do you call it? Surfacing. Culture is about addressing challenges. So if the statement of transformation is powerless, if I were an architect practicing, and I will take that as a challenge. So that's how, and when we take something as a challenge, that is the reason why we move forward. That's enough to bring us somewhere. So I don't, at the end, it's up to us how we look at the condition, because let's admit it, there is no right and wrong when we talk about architecture. But what I would say here is there is a contextual view in how we look at the architecture. Likewise, when we talk about transformation, to what context we address the issue. And by then we can say, oh, this is appropriate and this is inappropriate. This is saddening or this is encouraging. Or yeah, that's all I can say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Swartika. Yeah, Cuthbert, please. Yeah, still muted. Cuthbert, you're still muted.
We're getting, in a sense, away from architecture, which is good. Because the whole idea of power and what power is suggests the next topic of your seminar, the powers of architecture, where you could debate whether in fact architecture has the power to change something, or is architecture the process of change? Is it the process of change itself? Or has it got an influence on the way people think? And I think that's a very, very good subject. In social science, for example, there's a lot of theory about whether power resides in the individual or the power resides in the institution, right? So you've got social structures in the form of institutions, and you've got individual desires, opportunities, ideologies that exist in the individual. And there has to be some balance between the ideological framework of beliefs and the outcomes in terms of what architecture can do or cannot do. And I think it's a very interesting arena. And I was going to pull a book out of a shelf here. It's called Power. The book is just called Power by Steve Lukes, a very interesting social scientist. And I think, again, it's just this question of if architects are going to be dealing with power, they either see themselves as victims who create nice scenarios and themes and projects, but they don't have any real power. Any architect that's ever worked with a big developer knows where the power is. But what can the architect contribute in the sense of power that is able to change either society or to change individuals in the way that they look at things?
Yeah, I still agree. Yeah, that we still have a power over that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think we come to the last question, but the last question is very long, so I will let the host itself to ask question by himself. It's from Lab SKTD or the host. Hello, are you still in Lab SKTD?
Yeah, thank you, Pak Karel. Sorry, I'm Linda. I will. Yes. Maybe this for Professor Cuthbert. Yeah, it seems to me that order in our culture is about the order of the cosmos that is always there. And architecture as a built form constructed by humans should follow that order using the available materials that also there. Architectural order is derived or formulated in such a way to be in with the higher order, so architect doesn't need to invent a new order, but just following that existing order from the universe. And then my question, how about the relationship or consideration that Western architecture should embrace concerning to the existence of the nature? Thank you.
In some ways, I use better to answer the first one than me, the idea of the order of the cosmos. I think that obviously in terms of culture, what happened to my picture? It's disappeared.
No, you're still on.
Oh, okay.
It's fine. Everything's fine.
In a sense, I think this is a rather medieval beginning, or a medieval view in some ways, because in the medieval period, religion dictated everything, and the order of the cosmos was what religion dictated. Now, the problem is, whose cosmos? What constitutes the cosmos is dictated through ideologies, different forms of culture, different geographies, and things like that. So the idea that there is one order of the cosmos, I think is misplaced, because I would think if you go to Toraja people, and I've been to Toraja to have a look at the whole culture, you find the order of the cosmos different even from the Balinese. You know, you move from one island to another island, you've got a different interpretation of the cosmos. So I think that there's two attitudes here. You can say, well, there is an order to the cosmos that we can follow, or you can be fatalistic and say that even physicists haven't been able to explain the order of the universe, let alone the order of us who are sitting here on one tiny little microscopic planet. So I think it's that looking at following the order of the cosmos, I think it's too a big challenge. You know, and how do we design a city on the basis of the order of the cosmos, or even a building? I think that what you're really talking about here is, I think it's a cultural system disguised as the order of the cosmos, right? And that's okay. That's how people work. That's how cultures work. They have an order in their culture, and they say we're designing in accordance with the order of the cosmos. You know, Balinese culture is a very, very good example of this. You know, the head, the body, and the feet, and the Navasanga, and the distribution of space in accordance with religious. But if you go to England or Mexico or France or someplace else, you get completely different views as to, within religions usually, as to how the cosmos should be followed as an ordering principle. And I would challenge anybody to say what that was. So I think that in some ways, to design order in architecture, I think that there's some rather simple principles that take us rather far. You know, we can move forward from that. In terms of nature, I think you really have to look at globalization here. I mean, we're no longer in a culture where the idea of nature dominates, although it should. If we don't submit, in a sense, to the domination of nature, we don't have a planet anymore. So I completely agree with the idea that nature should dominate. But again, going back to political economy, I think you have to look at how political systems work, how ideological systems work, how waste is disposed and created, and how agriculture is distributed across the planet. Like, for instance, one of the biggest things we could do is stop eating meat. Everybody goes vegan, and there's enough food for a planet twice the size. So, but how do you can't change the ideology which is necessary to change the nature, right? You have to change the ideology first before nature can really succeed, especially today. So I think that Western architecture, the idea that it conforms to any natural principles at all, is changing, is definitely changing, but I don't think it's going to change fast enough. I'm a pessimist as to how far architecture can go in using technology, solar cells, and better insulation and stuff like that. I think that we'll have to look at much larger issues.
Okay, Swartika, do you have any opinion about it? Nick?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what else to say actually, but I think what I would like to underline here, it seems Ibu Linda saying that we have to go back to
basics.
Basics. Okay, but when our way of life no longer basics, and our needs now are much greater than the needs of our grandparents. So if the idea of how nature or how cosmological thoughts are or have been embedded in the vernacular architecture of the Nusantara, and we would like to put that forward now. We are faced with a huge obstacles in front of us. Because first of all, because who we are different than who our grandparents were. Okay, so here, if we are asking about, okay, we should have included nature in the way our ancestors included nature in their traditional home. This question is the fact is not true at all. It's not, no, sorry, it's not, I should not say not true at all. In some extent, it's not true. Let's say now, the Tongkonan home, it is not a living home. It is there. People are so, when we were there, and I came with a question, would you think Tongkonan will disappear at some point? People say no. They are proud of it. But when they say they're proud of it, but do they live in it? They don't. So this is a Tongkonan. When we learn about Tongkonan home, it's a form of to derive social capital, to extend the social capital going on within the society. And this is home used in different level. But let's look at the Balinese home now. I don't have, not because I'm Balinese, then I said that I didn't intend to ask a question, will the Balinese traditional home live, let's say, in several decades to come? I will definitely say yes. The reason is yes, because we live in it. So when we live in it, we need it. We need it for the function of a home, which is as a form of refuge, as a form of to shelter yourself, to protect yourself. So the idea of going back to nature, whether this is a question of what do you call romanticizing a condition, but whether it is valid now, I would say most of the time it's not valid, because just going back to us, the way of our life, how we form our lives. So our way of living dictate our form of architecture, what type of architecture we need. And are we going back to nature? No, I think it's not. We can't live without air conditioner now, because the way we formulate our home. So I think this is a question, it's not just about, I agree with what Professor Kasper is saying. We are not speeding here to put nature as a what do you call it, as a priority in how we design our built form. We are not quick enough. The deterioration caused by our action goes in a much faster speed than our capacity to address it. So yeah, that's what I will say. I'm not saying the traditional homes are not environmentally friendly, because we are not environmentally friendly, and we have left our tradition in constructing our home long time ago. And I was what do you call it, strongly awakened when I visited Padang. And I got a strong admiration of what do you call it, Padang home. Minangkabau home. And I was presented with totally different, because I went to Toraja before going to Minangkabau. And I thought the enthusiasm that I found in Toraja will be extended when I went to Minangkabau. It was not the case. And let's see also Joglo, home of the Javanese. Home of the Javanese, thriving more in Bali. We find more Joglo in Bali, I think. So, again, should we romanticizing everything and looking at ourselves as though that we are doing a lot? I don't know. I don't think we have. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Swartika, for your ideas. We come to the end of this webinar session, so we have to conclude our meeting today. And I think the conclusion I will up to you both of presenter with a question. Yes, a simple question. Now we are keep transforming. When we're discussing about order and disorder, I think we are keep transforming from order become disorder become order again, and we'll keep doing like that. It's like, maybe I agree with Cuthbert say that it's like yin-yang conception that we cannot detach one among others. So for the next our challenge, I mean upon the futures and our nowadays life today, especially when the COVID or maybe the next future challenge. So what we should do then? Can you answer that as Alexander Cuthbert and Swartika as our concluding remark? Thanks.
But just a minute. What can we do about what, Carol?
Yeah, for our challenge today that we facing COVID and the world keep transforming. So what we should do as a designer, urban designer or architect? That
get the vaccination.
That's the easiest one.
Is that all right?
No, simple things like, do we still just keep in order or just do both? Order or disorder, just full order?
No. Obviously, when things come to a crisis of any kind, the need for order increases.
Mm.
You know, like look at wars, for instance. The need for order increases incredibly. The numbers of things that people have to do, the safety precautions and health and organization of materials and equipment, it doubles or trebles. So in times of crisis, you can I think reasonably predict that the order that's demanded from your environment increases. And I think perhaps part of the problem in Indonesia as a whole is that it hasn't evolved the systems of order that are required to combat this kind of situation. I mean, in Australia, we have it's divided into 6 territories: Northern Territory, Victoria, New South Wales, and in 5, I think 5 out of 6, there's no COVID. And the only reason for that is because the social organization is absolutely incredible. We had one case in Sydney, a couple of days ago, and they've already vaccinated something like 40,000 people to take control over that situation. So for me, I think it's very simple. If you don't increase the order and insist on maintaining disorder, like Edo Fitri, for example, where you had people flatly refusing to stay home, then you can expect the COVID to go on and on and on and on. You know, people must accept an increase in social order, an increase in the legal system to prosecute people that don't behave, and if you don't do that, then you put your whole society in peril. So that the answer is very simple. The order must increase quite radically, you know, especially now that in Indonesia, they've just discovered the strain of COVID-19 from India. So it becomes incredibly important that people at the moment put the health of their families and their country before, you know, whatever particular religious belief they have. It doesn't matter what it is. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Cuthbert. And Swartika, please your opinion, especially when you saying about your four concept about myth, belief, and nature and society and social. That's quite interesting to create order of architecture. Do we still keep it? Swartika, please.
Okay. What I can say, my concluding remark here is, order is not an absolute being. It is a dynamic. So for order to work, since it is a dynamic existence, and the essence of it is adaptation. Why adaptation comes about? Because we are living in a fragile world, in a dynamic world. So order is not about absolute thing, while order should be conformed with by anybody, and it is has a dynamic existence, and order is about adaptation. And the overall say about all of this is that is the beauty of transforming, the beauty of transformation, how we do it. And that's when a system come about, a framework come about. Thank you, Mas Karen.
Okay, thank you, Swartika, and thank you for Cuthbert too, for your explanation and sharing your ideas today. And before we close this session, I turn back to Siwalatri. Siwalatri, are you still here?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Pak Karel, for conducting the discussion today, and thank you for the two of the speaker, Ibu Gam and Professor Alexander. And actually, the third session should be concluded by Professor Joseph Priyotomo, but now he is a little bit unwell, so he cannot give us some conclusion. But he already sent me a text about the order and the difference between European order and Nusantara, Arsitektur Nusantara order. I will read it, and maybe this one become like a opinion of the Professor Joseph, so I will read it. Okay, according to Joseph Priyotomo, the difference between European architecture and Nusantara architecture, there is European architecture only have one, I don't know, form or something style, like Romawi or Gothic or Baroque or something like that. But in Nusantara architecture, there are so many variety of architecture. So maybe the order is so many also. So Joseph say we should not put European architecture point of view to see architecture Nusantara order. I hope I translated correctly. That is the conclusion of Professor Joseph. Thank you for your text. And now I will present the certificate. Saya bisa share I cannot. I think the certificate already put in the chat room by our staff, and you can download it. But for the moderator, speakers, and the others, I will send it privately. So for closing remark for today, order is something dynamic, Ibu Gam say. So we should adapt it according to the situation, according to condition of our universe, of our environment, because of technology or something. So we always should have adapted. Thank you for today. I hope we can enjoy this discussion. Thank you for Mr. Kaler. Thank you for Ibu Gam. Thank you for Professor Alexander Kabat. For the closing thing, please turn on your video, and we will take a screenshot for the like administration thing or something like that. Screenshot. Okay. The first one, the first page. Okay. Our staff is going on. The second one, second page. And the third page, the last page. Okay, thank you for joining our seminar today. Thank you for all of you. The webinar will be closed by Om Santi 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 Om.
Om Santi Santi Om. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you,
See you.
Cuthbert.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
I hope I can see you guys sooner.
Keep healthy, Cuthbert.
Yeah,
See you.
difficult. Difficult.
Thank you for the lab of SKTD.
Sure.
LPBLE also.
No, you still there.
Oh, it's okay. It's finished. Thank you, Alex.
Makasih Bu Siwa.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Muksin.
Ya, sukses ya selalu ya. Thank you for Professor Alex Gilbert. Makasih Pak Bu